and welcome to our recording. We're here with Simon Needle, who's Strategic Lead Urban Forestry and Nature at Birmingham City Council. And Simon's going to go through the slides that he presented at the Nature Recovery Roadshow event that we held in March. So hi, Simon.
Hi, Krista.
Great. And thanks so much for your time today. Right, I'm going to share the slides now. Press that one. There we go.
No,
I think we're on full screen now, aren't we?
We are now, yes, that's it. Full screen.
Over to you, and just tell me when we want me to forward the slides.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so yeah, as Krista said, my name's Simon Needle. I'm Strategic Lead for Urban Forestry and Nature at Birmingham City Council. I've worked for the city for quite a number of years now, in a range of different roles, but all pretty much within the green environment. And this is just a bit of a summary of the work that we've been doing around how we're looking to green the city for people, biodiversity and climate change adaptation, amongst other things. So if we go to the next slide, please, Krista. So as most people will probably be aware, you know, there's lots of challenges out there, and Birmingham is no exception to that. We have a population of 1.1 million and rising, one of the youngest populations in Europe, and significant number of our wards are in the top 10 percentile of indices of multiple deprivation. Along with that, we have higher levels of years life lost in certain quarters. That can be as much as, you know, 10 or more years in fairly adjoining areas of the city. There's also variations in air pollution, urban heat islands, and pluvial and fluvial flooding as well. So particularly for Birmingham, we have a lot of surface water flooding rather than river flooding, and that's a real issue for us with sort of climate change. We've got a big need for additional homes as well. I mean, with the current Birmingham plan, we had, I think, a need for about 89,000 homes, but not sufficient space for all of those. And then obviously more recently, we're all aware things like the COVID pandemic brought to the fore the inequity or inequality of accessible green space, and particularly across the city, those minority ethnic communities were more impacted by the pandemic. They also had lower levels of green infrastructure, and they're also in those areas of poor air quality and high urban heat islands. So massive numbers of multiple impacts there, not just the main indices of multiple deprivation. And so, you know, we've been working with other departments such as public health, and they've been critical, really, I suppose, in getting to understand some of those impacts and benefits of green infrastructure on the residents of the city. So lots of work been going on there. Next slide, please. Here we go. So we've been working for a few years now as part of the Future Parks Accelerator programme. We've been working in partnership with the National Trust and a cohort of other local authorities on looking at the future of parks, how they were going to be funded, how we can improve biodiversity, how we can improve community engagement, a whole range of different topics. And out of that came the City of Nature plan, which is a 25-year plan for the natural environment in Birmingham. Next slide, please. Within that plan, we looked at a whole range of levels. We looked locally at how this plan would link to key policies and strategies. So we looked at how it's linking to our development plan, our future city plan, which is our new part. I suppose it's a vision document of how we want to see the city moving forward, our route to zero plans, our transport plan and health and wellbeing strategy. We have an urban forest master plan as well, which takes us to 2051, which looks at the city's tree resource as a whole. We looked at the nature recovery network plans and also our Commonwealth Games 2022 legacy plan. So obviously we're looking, this document was being produced in that sort of run up to that point. We also looked at how it links to regional strategies and policies as well. So things like the West Midlands Combined Authorities Natural Capital Plan and a vision for a West Midlands National Park, which is led by one of the local universities. And the national stuff as well. So the 25-year environment plan, the environment bill, the proposals obviously for it wasn't the environment bill then, now the Environment Act, and the Nature Recovery Network, green recovery and levelling up agendas. So we tried to link across all of those through this programme. Next slide, please. Our future city plan really replaces what was our big city plan originally. This looks at the core area of Birmingham, so that's the main city centre, but starts to look out beyond that sort of main business and retail area, and looks at how it's going to be changing over the years, looking at the change from mainly business and retail through to a much more mix of residential along with those business and leisure activities. Part of this is also looking at how we can improve things like the green pathways through the green routes through there. So looking at how it ties in with the transport policy, replacing road space with green space for mode shift. We're also looking at how that supports the delivery of a doubling of green space within the city to 20 to 30% of the city centre's area. Next one, please. Oh, there we go. So this is what I was saying there. So yeah, so that our future city plan, yeah, we're looking at the 30% green space. That's a doubling of the space. We're also looking at introducing 200 kilometres of active travel routes. So where we've currently got circular routes around the city, so sort of ring roads, main arterial routes through the city, we're looking at how we can take some of that road space to deliver greenways and integrate active travel routes into there. And of course, there's other aspects as well, which is looking at increasing the residential density, job creation, etc. So it's a big plan, but I think you can get the vision from there that the green infrastructure and City of Nature plays a massive part in how we can sort of deliver on this, and while trying to mitigate some of the impacts of climate change that we're seeing. Next slide, please. So in reviewing things like the future city plan and implementing the City of Nature plan within there, we've been reviewing the city's development plan, so the planning policies in there. So, you know, although we have biodiversity net gain now as a mandatory requirement, when you're looking at a large urban area with much of the land surface already developed, you know, we've said for a long time, you know, 10% of nothing, if that's what your baseline is nothing. So really that probably isn't going to deliver a huge amount of green infrastructure for the city, and certainly not what we would be needing to tackle sort of the impacts of climate change and deliver on other biodiversity aspects. So we're looking at introducing the urban greening factor. Some people may be aware of this. It's been used in London for a little while now, but certainly used in Europe and elsewhere around the world. So this requires developers to deliver a minimum threshold or achieve a minimum target of urban greening. And I think this provides quite a good framework for developers to sort of start and think about the layouts of their developments and how they can integrate that. So this is one way that we're greening the city, or will be greening the city, and we've already got a number of developers who are voluntarily using this this process as we speak, and we're seeing some really good developments coming through with good integrated green infrastructure. Next slide, please. We've also outlined our local nature recovery network. We've been doing a fair bit of work on these things over the years. It started many years ago with what used to be the nature improvement areas, where we worked in partnership with the local wildlife trust. We were one of, I think it was 13 improvement areas. Oh, there we go. One of 13 nature improvement areas in the UK, and the one within Birmingham and the Black Country was the only wholly urban nature improvement area. So that did a lot of work about looking at that landscape scale, about where our core ecological habitats were, where the connectivity was. And so we've built on that. So we've now set out, ahead of the local nature recovery strategy being sort of fully devised, what we see as being our key areas for network. So the dark green areas on here are most of our parks and open spaces, certainly the larger ones that have some existing conservation designation, and then looking at those areas that are buffered beyond that. So how can we, thinking about those old Lawton principles, you know, bigger, better, more joined up, how can we use this to sort of lever in through maybe development, regeneration, alongside these, making those spaces bigger, better, and more joined up. Next slide, please. We've also got the Urban Forest Master Plan, as we mentioned earlier. This is a plan from 2021 to 2051. This was devised following a review of our council policies on tree management. This looks across the city as a whole. So that's why we talk about the urban forest. It's all trees on public and private land. I was setting out a vision, if we can see the next slide, please, for the city. and our urban forestry programme, which is about having more trees for Birmingham that deliver benefits for health, nature and climate change for all communities within the city now and in the future as part of this inclusive and sustainable urban forest. So there's a number of aspects that we're looking at within there, which is about developing a diverse and resilient urban forest and building meaningful relationships between trees and members of the diverse communities, and managing the urban forest in an evidence-based way and working collaboratively in partnership, crossing communities, ownership, sectors and scales. Next slide, please. To think about the city at that scale, though, we've had to do a fair bit of mapping work and analysis. So we've looked at our canopy cover across the whole city, and we've established that down to lower super output area. So the sort of like a neighbourhood level. But as a city, we stand at around sort of about 18-19%. But if we exclude those areas that we can't plant at all, then actually by land area, we're around 20% canopy coverage. And that's pretty good. That's well above the average, really, for most of the UK, but it's still under our sort of target of achieving 25% canopy cover. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we've been using this mapping to sort of identify those areas where we need to target tree planting most. So this ties into things like the environmental justice and cultural values and equality, and also setting our canopy cover assessment goals. Next slide, please. So the mapping that we've done follows on, I suppose, or mirrors some of the environmental justice mapping that we've done. So we've looked at taking the existing canopy cover data that we have, the possibility for planting areas. We've used the climate risks from flooding, urban heat island, and poor air quality, and then overlaid those as well with the indices of multiple deprivation. And by doing that, we can see a really sort of stark picture of the city of those areas that are showing in red in that sort of top left-hand picture there, where there are significant multiple impacts that perhaps could benefit from additional tree planting because they are comparatively low in canopy cover. And just to give some sort of, I suppose, perspective to that, sort of the big green area to the north of the city on that map there, that's the wards around Sutton Park. Some of those are 49% canopy cover, whereas some of those within that those red areas are as low as 6%. And yet, so if we're thinking about the value that trees can play in terms of reducing urban heat island, then that's obviously quite an area to focus on. Next slide, please. So further in the work that we've been doing on things like the master plan and environmental justice, we've looked at devising a green infrastructure master plan for East Birmingham. Now, this is looking at this master plan doesn't necessarily show the existing opportunities, so that's the park spaces that are already within this area, but it's looking at where green infrastructure is perhaps needed most to make connections between existing green spaces or to tackle some of the issues that we've been seeing on those maps around urban heat islands. So if we go to the next slide, please. So in devising this master plan, we've been looking at using the biophilic principles and biophilic aims. Birmingham is part of the Biophilic Cities Network and has been for quite a number of years now. So within this, we've looked at access for all, proximity to nature, reduced climate risk, looking at biodiversity net gain, street greening, being an adaptive climate resilient city, looking at community involvement and stewardship, but also thinking about increased external and local investment opportunities and promoting local green jobs and skills within there. So we tried to tie all of these into our broader document. Next slide, please. So again, what we've done here is we've used some mapping data that we have. So we've taken a range of different data sets, overlaid these on a ward by ward basis to do some analysis about what is there, what opportunities are there, where would these be best placed. So we've overlaid our climate risk and vulnerability mapping, which is basically the work that we've done on the urban forest master plan and through the environmental justice, with a few other sort of data sets thrown in to show where those areas of high vulnerability. We've looked at where the nature recovery network fits within there, and we've also looked at things like green space and connectivity. So I think if we move to the next slide, I think we've got that on there. So yeah, so here we go. So we've got these different layers there. So we've looked at the existing green space, and we've used the angst analysis on there to look at the areas of the ward that are and aren't covered by that accessibility to green space. We've looked at the active travel analysis and where there are proposed new routes to be going through, because of course that could act as a catalyst for delivery. We've looked at the tree canopy cover and areas where we've got high cover, where we've got low cover, and then we've overlaid those with looking at green and blue connections. So where could these connections be best placed that perhaps align with the transport plans, the tree cut, where we want to link canopy cover together, how we link areas of poor green space through to those areas which have public open space, and thereby provide a green route extending, I suppose, out as fingers green infrastructure from those park spaces. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit more detail. So this is showing the same ward, but showing those opportunities. And we've got a mix there of existing opportunities within those park spaces and emerging opportunities that often tie to town centre regenerations. They might tie to some other kind of regeneration programme or transport scheme. Next slides, please. Then I suppose we've got to think about how we've been translating this for senior leaders and elected members. So next slide, please. So for me, I think it was looking at taking the national policies and plans and thinking about how we can best use that to interpret what we're doing and why we're doing things into meaningful ways for people who perhaps are aware but not sort of as engaged or as knowledgeable on the subject as those of us in the industry may be. So obviously the Green Future 25-year plan to improve the environment came out. Then in 2023 we had the EIP, so that environmental improvement plan, which was that first revision of that 25-year plan. And within there, I think it quite helpfully set out these connections between the environment goals and had this apex goal of thriving plants and wildlife, which was supported by 8 other goals, which is around clean air, plentiful water, managing exposure to pesticides and chemicals, maximising green resources, etc. You can see those laid out there. And all of those, including Apex 1, support and enhance beauty, heritage and engagement with the natural environment, which was goal 10. So if we move to the next slide, please. So yeah, so again, we've got there, we've sort of tried to set out what that statutory legislation was. So I did a bit of briefing notes for our senior leaders on what the commitments were, what the implications were, and particularly that duty that came into force in January 23 for local authorities, which was to have that that strengthened and extended general biodiversity duty, whereby we have to have considered what action we are taking for biodiversity and reviewed existing plans or policies. And plan to implement new policies. So there's a number of different things that have been coming in, like we said, over the past few years. Next slide, please. So yeah, so I basically put that down into the national targets and then related that through to local action. So the environment plans, goals, national adaptation reporting plans, etc., showing how that links into statutory duties that the local authority must deliver on, the city policies and practices, manifesto pledges and other plans and policies. And then what do we do already? How do we record this? What do we need to do or change? And can we collate this into a reportable format for KPIs so we can actually show we're making progress on this? Next slide, please. So that looked something like this. This is just one line on there. It's not necessarily comprehensive. There may be other things that you may be able to put in your own local authorities, or you may be aware of, or there's probably something I've missed as well. But this was just looking at that goal 1. So what was goal 1 within the IP was the thriving plants and wildlife. And then what was the statutory legislation that supports that? What was our adopted city policies and strategies that support that? So the City of Nature 25-year plan. Thinking about the biodiversity net gain policies, our local nature recovery policies, the urban forest master plan. Who's going to lead on that? Because it's a multi-directorate thing, really. So we've got the planning section within the city, but we've also got our park services teams within there as well. We've got a council manifesto pledge, which was from 22 to 26, which was developing this 25-year plan, support increasing number of green spaces. And we've got the combined authority plans, other plans and policies from government, etc. So it shows a comprehensive alignment, I suppose, of all of these against those goals. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, just as an example of what we could perhaps monitor or measure against some of these. So most local authorities or most areas will have will be having a local nature recovery network that they'll be inputting to. They probably already have a number of sites with local designation. So we've just saying here, perhaps we could show that we've got the established local nature recovery network. We could have a measure of the number of sites identified within each network, the number of sites with nature conservation designation, the number of sites of potential sites of interest, and the number of sites that we've designated as a site of importance for nature conservation, say, in the last 12 months, and then looking at perhaps the number of sites in positive condition for biodiversity and the number of sites that we've secured funding for through net gain, or the number of sites with up-to-date quantifiable condition assessments for UK HAB, and so on and so forth. So we've set it out like this with a number of measurable practices. The next thing now is actually to refine this down and actually get down to a reasonable number that we can report against. Next slide, if there is one. I think we're close to the end. There we go. Because there we got to the end. So hopefully that was a bit of a snapshot of what we've been doing and how we're trying to relate all of this to the natural environment and net gain across a range of different aspects.
That's absolutely fantastic, Simon. And there's some really great work going on there. And I've just got a couple of questions that came up from the audience when we presented. I'll just a couple of quick questions. So there's lots of great work there. But how are you making all of this sustainable? So, you need to have funding there, and, also what's the role of private investment to support action?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I think there's a number of different aspects on there and things that we're still exploring. So, most local authorities are going to be in suffering from sort of financial pressures through budgets, through increasing costs. Birmingham is clearly no exception to that. And so I think this is where we need to be thinking more creatively about how we do continue to support this green infrastructure. So we've got work with, thinking about the public health benefits of the green space. So public health are supporting our ranger service for the next couple of years through with funding. So that's will be about, while it's delivering public health targets, it's about engaging people with the natural environment, getting them out, undertaking healthy activities. So targeting mental health and well-being, but it's supporting the management of green spaces. We've got continued partnership work with people like the National Trust, Woodland Trust, and others who are also able to lever in, I suppose, investment in these spaces. Biodiversity net gain is one, I suppose, could be a key opportunity for us to secure funds. Obviously there's a statutory requirement for 30 years maintenance sums to come with any off-site allocation. So how do we enable the sites that we have to be put forward for that off-site delivery? So we've got some work already undertaken around that, getting some baselining in. And then there's the broader projects as well. So working with the Combined Authority, they're one of 4 pilots on a local investment in natural capital programme. So that's looking at how we can conglomerate or look to attract that much bigger scale investment from third sector or businesses around, can we conglomerate projects together to actually create a multi-million-pound investment opportunity that may deliver significant projects across that wider landscape, but be able to deliver the actual funding to deliver it and also maintain it. So there's a number of different aspects on there. And of course, greening the city as a whole, getting individual developers and developments to include that green infrastructure in there. So you form this matrix of spaces. They'll obviously have their own responsibility for managing that. But, so there we go.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Simon. And I think you mentioned some, kind of key groups that you work in. I suppose, what the most, which groups are the most valuable really to help support action, and does the role of Biophilic City kind of help to make those connections?
I think it does. Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things that the sort of the Biophilic Cities network and the Biophilic. Well, although we sort of talk about Biophilic status, I mean, it is something that we are aspiring to. We're trying to achieve that Biophilic City status, and I think it's a long road to there. And just like with a lot of new terms, it's taken a long time to get people to understand what that actually means. But it is making a difference now. We do have references to, biophilic design in our design policies now, not just around the spaces externally, but also about how those internal spaces function as well. So that's, that is helping. I think, the work that we've been doing with Biophilic Cities Network, the work we've been doing through the Future Parks Accelerator, the Urban Forest Master Plan, has put us on a bit more of a global stage in many respects, and obviously, you know, the things like you're doing here, you know, puts us, you know, promotes us on that sort of UK stage, and does promote and is seen to be promoting Birmingham, and so therefore, you know, more acceptance, more impetus is put behind it. So I think, you know, all those partnerships do really work, and you know, the more we talk about it, the better it becomes for us.
Definitely, and providing that visibility, isn't it, in terms
Yeah,
of
exactly.
people hearing about what you're doing and sharing that learning. So in terms of the learning, I've just got the last question here is, you know, what are your top tips really in terms of, there's lots of great maps out there, and, you know, some really kind of key maps to actually engage with other services and other communities in terms of actually understanding the wider link in terms of green infrastructure to health, etc. So what's your top tips on using maps as decision-making tools?
Okay, so I think, you know, to start off with, you know, we had to understand what data we did have, and what data we don't have as well. I think we also need to consider how we use that data, because I think, you know, just like with everything else and statistics, you can use it for a number of purposes. You can, and also how you interpret that might influence the results. So, you know, we included things like we actually broke out all of the indices of multiple deprivation in our urban forestry sort of planning mapping. But actually, you find that some of those data sets can really skew your results if you use them. So just be, you know, be very careful about what you are including, and understand that. And so crime is one of those IMD stats that, you know, actually really does it bear much relationship to what we're doing? You know, there's evidence out there that says actually, you know, well managed green space around neighborhoods actually reduces crime. So maybe that's, you know, we do need to consider that. But actually, in terms of where we should be prioritizing tree planting, we need to be thinking that actually it's the climate mitigation aspects that we're looking at. So now, you know, looking back, we wouldn't include that perhaps in that data set now. But I do think that maps have been a real, so, and that GIS data has been a real big bonus for us, because what it takes a lot of words to put into act, I suppose, to describe what you want. These maps have been a real good piece of work to explain to our elected members exactly what is going on. They can see there's a visual representation. You can show, you know, what happens if you change things. So yeah, don't be afraid of the data. Don't be afraid of using maps, but do think about how, do think about what it might show and how you're going to use that data. It's probably not top. It's not lots of top tips, but yeah.
No, but some really, really kind of key learning there in terms of, you know, your experience of using those maps and how you've been using them. And obviously the slides provide a great illustration of how you have been doing that. So there's lots of great work there, Simon, and your time's been really invaluable in terms of just absolutely sharing your experience in terms of what you're doing. So thank you very much for your time and your presentation, and just answering some of those questions. That's absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to stop recording now. So here we go. And thank you very much. That's absolutely brilliant.